Morning, everybody. Morning. That's a lot of people. Thank you all for coming. I know some of you have traveled thousands of miles to get here at great expense, and that is not lost on the family. I'm Dave Greene, Bobbie's son, though many of you know me by what she called me, Davy, and that went over well in high school. We're here in the Kennedy Center for many good reasons. It's a thread running through Mom's life. Our first speaker, Mrs. Kennedy Townsend, the daughter of one of my moms and my heroes, Robert Kennedy, will talk to us about how Mom's life was influenced by Robert F. and John F. Kennedy and her time working on their behalf, interviewing Supreme Court justices, secretaries of state, and defense. The Kennedy Center was also a place she visited for decades, starting with taking me to puppet shows here as a little kid, to being a season ticket holder for the opera, all the way to recent Kennedy Center honors for Led Zeppelin. You could say she gave this place a whole lot of love. But this theater, the Eisenhower Theater, is the place here closest to Mom's essence. Eisenhower planned the D-Day invasion to retake Europe from the Nazis. Well, Mom worked on the preservation of the D-Day landing site in Normandy, France. And, for that matter, the anniversary of the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Europe after the war. You're welcome, Europe. And finally, it was in this room that Mom and some of the other speakers today hosted events for Vital Voices that acts on behalf of women throughout the world. The family received such incredible letters after it happened. For instance, from television legend Norman Lear, the creator of All in the Family, he wrote, "Bobbie was one of those rocks in my journey to political and social awareness." Well, now he's about to win the Kennedy Center honors this year. There were also letters from movie stars and ambassadors, her lifelong friend, Vice President Joe Biden, and first ladies and presidents of both parties. But what really mattered to Mom most was the outpouring of love from her army of cherished friends, some of 60 years, some of recent months, some who actually turned out to work at the Kennedy Center. And then there are the others out there, numbering in the thousands for sure, whose lives Mom touched and don't even know it. In Kenya, she pushed for local schools to allow girls in. Those girls grew up to be women who had daughters and then went to school, and who now have daughters who now go to school. The same can be said of refugees from Indochina or people currently living in Myanmar. To all of them, I say, there was a lady named Bobbie. Her beloved friend Ann Bartley said Mom could make friends with a telephone pole. And for that matter, a lamppost. Then she could make the telephone pole friends with the lamppost in order to make a better village. Mom gave Neil and me a book titled Never Eat Alone. I never read it. There was no need to. It was Mom's philosophy in a single sentence. Had she chosen a life of business in the private sector, with her charm, creativity, and drive, she could have actually written The Art of the Deal. But then, what of those girls in Kenya? I don't know what the people are about to speak are going to say, but I'll bet I can guess some themes. She was not only an incredible mother, stepmother, grandmother, devoted wife, loyal friend, but she was also a nurturing mentor, a terrific employee, a crusader for good, a rare bipartisan. You should see the letter we got from Mr. and Mrs. Bush. And a patriot, an actual patriot, not someone who puts a Chinese-made American flag sticker on their foreign-built pickup and thinks they've done their duty for God and country, but someone who looked for ways to serve her country and protect its legacy around the world. It's September 9th at 10 a.m., though it feels like 15 or 20 years too early, but I have a special algorithm for that. When I take in what my mom accomplished compared to an average schmo like me, she lived 74 Bobbie years, which is actually 148 human years. Not too shabby. Hers was a life lived in full. I'm honored to yield the stage to Mrs. Kennedy Townsend. Thank you.
My prayers are with Pat and Dave. Thank you for those beautiful words for all of us. And my prayers are with Neil as well. In his inaugural address, President John F. Kennedy passed the torch to a new generation. Bobbie grabbed that torch, and it shines brightly because of her. She was part of the new frontier. Her spirit of service and adventure led all those whom she met. On October 14, 1960, Bobbie was watching John Kennedy on television when he announced his plans for the Peace Corps. Bobbie immediately turned to her boyfriend, Dan, sitting in Syracuse, and said, "That's what we should do." 4 years later, she landed in Nairobi as part of the first Peace Corps class in Kenya. She was determined to do what she could for our country. When Bobbie returned from the Peace Corps, she heard about the John F. Kennedy Oral History Project, and she thought that's where she should serve next. She wrote beautifully, and she had studied the Kennedy administration when she was in college. She knew it in detail. The listed position called for a master's degree. But when she went for an interview, it was revealed that Bobbie had better depth than anybody who had ever gotten an MA. But so what should have been a quick and easy hire wasn't. The problem was not archival credentials. The obstacle that slowed the process to a snail's pace was that she was, dare I say, a woman. The person who interviewed her exclaimed over and over, "We never expected to hire a woman." Oh, no, not a woman. Not in 1967, anyway. As Bobbie described it, she kept calling. She explained that she knew the era. She could be a great interviewer. And of course, she made an effort to dress appropriately. Smarts, persistence, and the dress worked. She was the first woman ever hired to be in the Oral History Project, and she was excellent. So good, in fact, that a year later, she was put in charge of the Oral History Project for my father, Robert Kennedy, and for that, our family is very grateful. She started the project in late 1968. So she had the responsibility for imagining not only who should be interviewed, but how the research should be conducted. It wasn't easy. This was before any books had been written. Bobbie was the second draft of history. In addition, apart from the lack of formal research, she had to deal with some, let us say, tough personalities. She described how some of the interviewees just won't let you talk to them. My mother, for instance. Others couldn't tell you what really went on because they wanted to tell their side of the story for themselves, their own roles. Senator Jacob Javits and Mayor John Lindsay, to name two. And yet, despite this and so many other obstacles, Bobbie was successful. And countless historians have gone on to rely on her critical work. Bobbie, of course, had opinions on their work. She thought, for instance, that Arthur Schlesinger did not give my father enough credit for what he had accomplished in Bedford-Stuyvesant, suspecting that he was probably more interested in foreign affairs and civil rights than the hard but unglamorous work of community building. Right on, Bobbie Greene. And interestingly enough, she described the difference between the interviews about President Kennedy and about those for my father. She said, and I'm quoting, "People would invariably say that the first time they met John Kennedy, they saw greatness in him immediately. Not so with my father. As Bobbie described it, Because he started so much in his brother's shadow and he was so poor a public speaker, just not a public speaker, he never blossomed in the spotlight in the way that John Kennedy did. I think his charisma came more from his diffidence and his shyness and the reticence that comes across than being an obviously attractive speaker. I can't believe she was in charge of the project. Anyway, she goes on to tell a story that Eunice had done in the interview. Eunice Kennedy Shriver, my aunt. I suppose all of you know who that is. Anyway, Eunice said, in speaking about Daddy, Bobbie Kennedy, there are two Bobbies in this story, it's very hard, so put on your imagination. Bobbie would never have been the man that he became without his wife. I wouldn't say that about any of my other brothers, but there is no question that Ethel was the key. The first time that we went to hear Bobbie speak, it was in Georgetown. It was just so embarrassing about how poor a speaker he was. That's when he was working on the Hill and the Rackets Committee, and everybody went back to the house, and Ethel just went on and on and on about what a brilliant speech he had been, and how simply marvelous he was, and how everybody was just aroused by his greatness. And Eunice, said, "Ethel, come on, he was just awful." But apparently, Ethel just never caught on, and she just went on and told Bobbie he was great over and over again and gave him this tremendous confidence to become something, but that perhaps he never would have been without her. As you can imagine, I just love that story. And I believe that Eunice felt comfortable telling that to Bobbie because she saw something special in Bobbie. Bobbie was my daughter Maeve's mentor in the White House when Maeve was a college intern in the First Lady Hillary Clinton's office. She helped Maeve as she met the First Lady's stellar staff, researched the memos, and found her way in the maze of offices. Bobbie also told Maeve how much he loved being in the Peace Corps in Africa and being one of the first volunteers. I was not surprised then when Maeve entered the Peace Corps, she also chose to go to Africa in Mozambique. If Africa had enchanted Bobbie, Bobbie also enchanted Maeve. I'm always grateful to Bobbie for my daughter's life-changing experience. Bobbie has touched the lives not only of my daughter, but many of us in this room. We admire Bobbie for her ability to both make history and save it. In recording history, Bobbie Greene inspired people to reveal fascinating insights. Because she studied history, she listened carefully with a full heart. She was eager to hear what people wanted to say and could reveal. And in making history, our friend Bobbie not only saw things that never were, she encouraged, goaded, cheered on her friends and acquaintances to make their dreams come true. And while we will miss her, her spirit lives in each of us. God bless you, Bobbie.
Good morning. My name is Fiona Lawless. I met Bobbie in 2001 when I joined her at Save America's Treasures, or SAT, at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. We worked side by side for over a decade. Literally side by side. Our desks were literally 2 feet across from each other. So we not only shared work stories, but everything else as well. Bobbie and I were very close, and I loved her very much. We were not only colleagues, we were not only friends, we were self-appointed sisters. I can still remember that first day being greeted by this gorgeous, vivacious woman with a big smile on her face. "Hi, I'm Bobbie." Little did I know at the time what a blessing and an honor it was going to be able to work with and have such a close relationship with this American treasure. Bobbie was always a natural storyteller. As director of Save America's Treasures at the National Trust, she was uniquely able to translate the esoteric and academic aspects of historic preservation into meaningful common parlance while illuminating the compelling human stories that brought these places to life and into a modern context. Under Bobbie's leadership, what was intended to last for 2 years triumphed for 12. Bobbie cultivated bipartisan support from Congress, vital help from the leadership of First Lady Hillary Clinton and later First Lady Laura Bush, co-chairs Richard Moe, then president of the National Trust, and Susan Eisenhower, noted author and granddaughter of President Eisenhower. Bobbie always found meaningful ways to engage with these leaders, whether it was connecting Mrs. Clinton to the extraordinary work of a small group of impassioned volunteers eager to preserve Eleanor Roosevelt's legacy, or developing a tour for Mrs. Bush focused on the historic homes of some of our literary leaders, like Louisa May Alcott's Orchard House, Edith Wharton's The Mount, or the home of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Richard Moe wanted to be here today, but at the last minute was not able to make it. He's asked me to share these memories from his time working with Bobbie. I deeply regret that health prevents me from being with you today to celebrate the life of Bobbie Greene McCarthy, my colleague and my friend. When Bobbie first arrived at the National Trust to take charge of the private side of the newly established Save America's Treasures program, which was envisioned by First Lady Hillary Clinton, the White House Millennium Council, and the Trust to commemorate the millennium by bringing public and private resources to restore nationally significant historic places all over the country, it was like a cyclone had arrived. Take charge Bobbie did, with energy, enthusiasm, and a radiant spirit that was her defining characteristic. She rallied volunteers and donors to help with historic sites important to them, libraries, churches, and courthouses, and of course the homes and places associated with Americans who made significant contributions to our society. It came as no surprise to anyone, certainly not to Hillary or me, that an extraordinary number of the latter were women's sites. One of the very first grants went to the Sewell Belmont House here in Washington, known for its role in women's history, while others went to the bust that Rosa Parks made a civil rights icon, Betsy Ross's Star-Spangled Banner, and certainly one of Bobbie's favorites, Valkill, the Hyde Park home of Eleanor Roosevelt, where she assembled a group of incredibly committed volunteers. I enjoyed working for Bobbie during those years. She did have a take-charge style, as you know, just as I suspect Hillary and hundreds of others did. When she was on her game, she became an irresistible force. And because of that, together with Hillary's leadership and the work of thousands of people who cared about their heritage, Save America's Treasures became the most significant public-private preservation effort in the history of the country. Bobbie made a tremendous difference in this effort, and as a result, you can find her legacy in communities all over America. I was fortunate during this time to know Bobbie personally as well as professionally. Our offices at the Trust were adjacent, and we both had a habit of showing up early. She would invariably wander into my office around 8 a.m. with a cup of coffee and the latest news about Hillary, but we invariably covered subjects ranging far and wide. What I remember best from these conversations was another side of Bobbie, soft, reflective, and sensitive, especially where her family was concerned. It was clear to me that she deeply loved Patrick and her family, and while I'm sure all of them know that, they should never doubt it. The same was true of her friends, and there are many of them here today. It was a great privilege to be a friend of Bobbie's, and I can't believe she's gone. I will miss her very much and will continue to be inspired by her passion for our shared heritage. Thank you, Bobbie, and God bless you. Richard Moe. Dick's comments wonderfully show the big picture of Bobbie, but I'd like to take a few moments to highlight some key projects and partnerships that show Bobbie's impact in practice. One of the accomplishments Dick referenced is the Star-Spangled Banner, the flag that inspired our national anthem. It was donated to the Smithsonian Institution in 1912, and after nearly a century, it eventually had deteriorated. Inspired, Bobbie noted a connection between this iconic symbol and the Ralph Lauren brand, which at the time displayed the American flag on much of its collection. She worked her magic, and not only was she able to raise enough to match a $3 million federal SAT grant, but she raised over $18 million in private support, including $13 million from the Polo Ralph Lauren Corporation. 10 years later, the National Museum of American History celebrated its grand reopening with the Star-Spangled Banner newly installed in a new flag hall as the centerpiece of the remodeled museum. So next time when you go see the flag, think of Bobbie. Besides Dick Moe, many others have sent their praises today, such as Aaron Mast, the head of President Lincoln's Cottage. Bobbie not only helped spearhead its restoration, but she also enlisted the help of Sharon Patrick and 2 master craftsmen to create a replica of the White House's Lincoln desk for the cottage. This specially commissioned reproduction desk, which is believed to be where he penned his famous Emancipation Proclamation to end slavery, now sits in the cottage, with its original and perfectly measured drop lid in black walnut and bird's eye maple interior. So again, when you go to visit Lincoln Cottage, and I certainly hope you will, think of Bobbie. Since her passing, other SAT project heads have written us about Bobbie's contributions to helping save the incredible diversity of the SAT sites and collections that represent important threads within the tapestry of our country's heritage and reflect the program's extraordinary range and collaborative spirit. These include Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church, the African Meeting House, the Angel Island Immigration Center, Mesa Verde, and the Acoma Pueblo. Acoma Pueblo, a mesa-top settlement within present-day New Mexico, is a National Historic Landmark considered to be the oldest continuously inhabited community in North America. In 2001, Acoma received a $400,000 federal SAT grant to restore its famous San Esteban del Rey Mission Church. Greg Smith, Acoma's DC counsel, asked me to convey the following today. The governor of Acoma and many members of the Pueblo are heartbroken at Bobbie's sudden passing, but still so glad to have known her, and so thankful that she took such an interest in their lives and culture. Bobbie had a real heart for Native America. It seems likely that she was that way towards everyone she encountered, but from a Native perspective, that open heart served to bridge cultural divides that are still strong between the Native world and mainstream America. Thank you, Greg. SAT's strength lay not only in these monuments and historic structures it helped to save, but also in the countless collections of historic papers, artifacts, and recordings that reside in libraries, archives, and museums across the country. One that commands particular significance today is the World Trade Center model. Before 9/11, there were 2 architectural models of the World Trade Center, one in the tower's lobby and the other discovered within the archives of the American Architectural Foundation. After September 11, 2001, the dusty foundation model took on a new meaning as the last surviving 2-scale replica of the towers and complex. The model was in pretty bad shape. In the end, the project received a $62,000 federal SAT grant, and together we secured important private support from Alcoa and Tourism Cares. The restored model ultimately became an important centerpiece within the World Trade Center Memorial and Museum, where you can see it to this day. After 9/11, less travel hurt tourism and many heritage places that rely on tourists to survive. Bobbie engaged with Robin Tauk, who's here today, and other industry leaders through the Tourism Cares Foundation to help save many cultural and historic sites across the country, such as the Ellis Island Ferry Building, Gettysburg, and many more. Robin offered the following comments. Bobbie leveraged our industry and its resources, our hearts and our hands. We are a huge industry, and we embraced Bobbie and her brilliance in teaching us how to bond together and bring our greatest sites to life for future generations. We followed her to dozens of places, and Bobbie and Fiona, the dynamic duo, followed us to our Tourism Cares for America volunteer events across our nation. Those were a lot of fun. A special friendship forged for 2 decades. Today, the entire US travel industry stands with me in expressing their gratitude to Bobbie's family and friends and associates in her memory. Another Bobbie-generated partnership was with the International Furnishings and Design Association. In 2007, the IFDA honored Bobbie with its Trailblazer Award for her leadership of SAT's partnership with the design community. Bobbie joined a select group of previous honorees, including Lady Bird Johnson, Philippe Stark, Adriana Scalamandre-Bitter, Michael Graves, and Bob Timberlake. Also of note, Beth Newberger and Bobbie creatively arranged a multimedia partnership with HGTV called Restore America, A Salute to Preservation. Through this campaign, HGTV contributed $2 million to the trust while providing $4 million of on-air exposure for 24 SAT sites across the country, including the Mark Twain House, the Conservatory of Flowers, the Paul Robeson House, and the Edison Ford Winter Estates. Finally, as Dick Moe referenced earlier, there were several women's sites that were near and dear to Bobbie, like the Sewell Belmont House here in Washington, and many of whose board members are here with us today. But there was another unique treasure very close to Bobbie's heart, Eleanor Roosevelt's home at Valkill, not just for the site itself, but also for its volunteers. She called these lovely ladies her steel magnolias, who with elegance and grace rolled up their sleeves, opened their hearts and checkbooks, inspiring others to do the same along the way, to preserve Valkill, the only national park dedicated to a First Lady. A few of these steel magnolias are in the audience today: Claudine Baker, Ronnie Gannat, and others. Bobbie's relationship with Valkill and the legacy she leaves there is best told through the words of Claudine Baker, an original steel magnolia. Claudine says, "I have thought of Bobbie as my own personal Eleanor Roosevelt. She was a humanitarian, unflappable, smart, possessed of a unique sense of humor and adventure, and never took credit for her good works. She inspired loyalty, to say the least." In follow-up to Claudine's words, I am delighted to announce that in honor of Bobbie's tremendous legacy, the Valkill Partnership and Tourism Cares have launched the Bobbie Green McCarthy Memorial Project at Valkill. The barn at Valkill remains the last major restoration project at the park, culminating nearly 20 years of achievements of SAT projects for the site. The ultimate goal of this multi-phased undertaking is to convert the barn into an education and conference center, so that the site will be able to provide an even more enriching learning experience for educational programs, speakers forums, and other activities, ensuring that Eleanor Roosevelt's story as a champion for social change and human rights and the unique preservation story of Valkill can continue to illuminate and inspire the next generation. In closing, if Bobbie could be with us here today, I think she would tell us that her life's greatest joys and proudest moments were not about her achievements, of which there were so many. What I think she would tell us is that what brought her the greatest happiness was her family and the many enduring friendships she made along the way. If we can learn anything from her extraordinary life, it would be to continue those friendships with open hearts and open minds, and as our dear Bobbie would so often say, but which means so much more today, be good to each other. Thank you.
First, thank each of you for coming this morning, and thank each of the speakers for helping us give voice to our hearts. At 7:30 p.m., May 25th, 1997, I reached out to Bobbie Green and said, "Hi, I'm Pat McCarthy." Bobbie said, "I like Patrick better." Later at a restaurant, our host, Valerie and Jack, stepped away to greet a friend. Reflecting on Bobbie's busy life, I said, "You seem accessible, but not that available." Bobbie replied, "I always make time for things that are important to me." You know, possibilities. You know, For the next 20 years, I saw how so many of you here now were important to Bobbie, because so often Bobbie was there for you. The night we met as we talked till dawn, I learned we were both mostly Romanian. I also discovered that of several 100 million car tapes in existence, our own cars had only 2 tapes. Yes, the same 2 tapes. Okay, I brought it up. Andrew Lloyd Webber's greatest hits and Barbra Streisand's greatest hits. A few weeks later in Delaware, I brought Bobbie a $10 clock set permanently at 7:30 to commemorate the moment we met. And that clock we always kept close. As the years went by, I called Bobbie beautiful Bobbie. She called me Patty. Bobbie's last words were, "Oh, Pat." With the deaths of parents, loved ones, and friends increasingly part of our lives, I have felt selfish as this day neared of publicly mourning and celebrating Bobbie. Many of you have suffered as much or far more. So many the world over suffer hourly. The tragic passing of a spouse or a child, often way before their time. They do so absent a fraction of the love, support, and prayers you have shown my family, for which each of us are deeply grateful. In the Peace Corps, Bobbie motorbiked hundreds of miles back and forth to Kenya's capital to lobby for her village children to take high school entrance exams. Bobbie's message to education officials: how can President Moi grow Kenya if his people can't earn a living and feed their families? 2 years later, Bobbie's villagers, and today all young Kenyans, are free to take high school and college entrance exams. That was Bobbie 50 years ago. She never changed. My favorite photo of Bobbie was taken the morning of her 72nd birthday, shortly before debarking at Monte Carlo. Bobbie was in a white robe, a ballerina leg open to a knee, a full champagne glass lifted, happy and beautiful with her 1,000-watt smile. Then, to Bobbie's surprise, we went past the line that I was supposed to read. Soon we taxied towards Nice as if extras in To Catch a Thief. Then, to Bobbie's surprise, we went left past the airport and were in our room, gazing out at the endless, gorgeous flowers and crashing waves of Cap St. Ferrat. Bobbie turned and said, typically, we have to take our grandchildren here when they're old enough. She always had her priorities. I don't want to thank you again, so wait a second here. This is the last page. Except I left it somewhere. When Norman Mailer passed away, many of us remember that it was Jack Kennedy who passed away, and Norman Mailer wrote that it felt like amputation. And I reach out now often, for that loving and helpful hand, that's now gone. Bobbie had an enormous heart that some say she exhausted on giving to others. Even 18 hours, less than 18 hours before she passed, I saw that her heart was still on speed dial to others, still helping others. No one I have known has been as loyal as Bobbie. The afterlife is about giving to others, loving others. Bobbie was exemplary that way. Now, in her physical absence, Bobbie would want us to go forward as she lived, seeking the best in each other and fighting for what is true. Thank you.
I'm Milan Verveer, and I met Bobbie Greene over 30 years ago. Like so many of her generation, she was indeed inspired by President Kennedy's call to service. Ask not what your country can do for you, he urged, but what you can do for your country. She had a strong sense of duty and an intense commitment to making a difference. When I first met her in 1986, we were both new to People for the American Way, the organization Norman Lear created to safeguard our constitutional liberties. I learned very early on from Bobbie about the experience in the Peace Corps that you've now heard so much about, because it had such a profound impact on her and stayed with her the rest of her life. Her Peace Corps experience also made her a strong champion for People Force program to foster civic engagement in young Americans. She too wanted to have the experience she had. And coincidentally, it was a program that Hillary Clinton chaired. At People For, as the Vice President for Development, she became the indispensable member of the staff who enabled worthy initiatives to become viable. She was a fundraiser extraordinaire. In leading our public policy efforts, I was dependent on Bobbie. Together, we reached out to potential donors whom she encouraged to become part of a common cause, part of a caring community dedicated to safeguarding an independent judiciary that was under threat, to exposing the religious rights policy agenda, and so many more pressing issues. Often we walked through the doors that Norman Lear opened, and Hollywood too got to experience Bobbie's passion for what truly mattered. She had a wonderful way with people. She was thoughtful and persuasive. She was a gentle cajoler, but a cajoler nevertheless. Many donors became her friends for life, and many of you are here today. She spent enormous time with you, answering questions, updating on what was happening on the issues, and each would become a part of her ever-expanding circle, a circle, I might add, that she didn't hold close to her vest. She shared it with others. I remember one day we went to New York to meet with a representative of a well-known family foundation that Bobbie had known from previous fundraising efforts. She and I made our passionate case for why support for People For at this critical time would make an enormous difference. We thought we had been extremely effective, only to have the representative say, well, the adult children only have one issue they're interested in now. There was a pregnant pause, the wheels turning in Bobbie's head as she was thinking of how do I connect with whatever the issue is he is about to mention. But when he said animal rights, she was speechless. But not for long, Bobbie being Bobbie, she elicited a commitment from him to explain the stakes to the family and urged them this once to add another priority for the sake of the country. She was passionate about the issues, and that was the real key to her success. She believed in and she cherished the American way and the values our country stood for, and she did her part. She worked long days, and then she'd rush home to Neil and Davy, who were her pride and joy. As a single mom, she didn't have it easy, and the boys were always uppermost in her mind. She never wanted to fail them, and she never did. Bobbie, as we all know, always looked fabulous. She didn't have much to spend on her wardrobe, yet she somehow always looked more stylish than the rest of us. It wasn't until she married Patrick that he persuaded her to finally get rid of some of her ensembles from the 70s. She had 2 indulgences. One was La Prairie Cosmetics that she maintained were worth the fortune that she spent on them, and Christoph's Hair Salon. And who could argue with her? When my daughter was getting married, I said to Bobbie I didn't know how I was going to pull off the wedding working around the clock at the White House. And she told me, "Don't worry. I don't have a daughter, and I always wanted to plan a wedding." Besides, we all knew she had exquisite taste. She was on speed dial with design cuisine. And she reported into me on occasion and just handled everything with aplomb. When I arrived at the site of the reception on the wedding day to make sure that all was in order, a member of the catering staff asked me if I were Miss Green. I said, no, I was the mother of the bride. He politely told me that they only dealt with Miss Green. In 2000, for the millennium, Hillary created an initiative to mark this important moment in history under the banner of Honor the Past, but Imagine the Future. And a key component about which you've heard was Save America's Treasure. Bobbie had earlier joined the First Lady's staff, but before too long, her fundraising skills would be recognized as invaluable to help undertake this massive new initiative. It became clear that it would be best for Bobbie to lead this effort with Dick Moe at the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the private sector partner. Devoted to this project and devoted to the First Lady, Bobbie agreed to leave the White House and all of its privileges to undertake this enormous national commitment. And yes, as you've heard, she made an incredible contribution. Of course, what we all know about Bobbie best, and what each of us has personally experienced in some way, was her unstinting generosity with her time, her advice, her network. She was always there to provide counsel on that next job, on fundraising of all kinds for every organization you can think of, on who to put on boards and who to select for key positions. She was the ultimate connector. When we were getting Vital Voices off the ground, one of the first people I turned to for advice was Bobbie. And among our first funders who are here today were those Bobbie had recommended. She was always other-focused, and she made such a difference in the lives of so many people and so many organizations. Yet despite all those extraordinary experiences, her greatest treasure was indeed her family. She was a very proud grandmother. First, Bryce came along, and there was no end to how wonderful Bryce was. And then Poeta, and then West. And David and Cammie and Neil and Erica grew her family circle. And when Patrick came into her life, he became her greatest happiness. They were constantly enriched by each other's company, their shared values, and their interest in politics, the Democratic Party, that is. and yes, Bobbie's endless discussions about the latest news she had heard on NPR. And through Patrick, Bobbie inherited what she called her beloved bonus daughters and their families. Robert Kennedy, quoting Ulysses, said, "Some people see things as they are and ask why. Others dream things that never were and say, why not?" Bobbie was a why not person. She dreamed what could be and what a difference she made. And she lived what she believed, that the greatest reward in life is giving and serving, and that it is in giving and serving that we receive. Thank you, Bobbie, for your example and more. We will truly miss you.
Good morning. How do you begin to describe our Bobbie? Forever open, forever optimistic, forever generous. Forever, 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 and then never. Bobbie never met an outstretched hand that she didn't grasp, a smile that she didn't return, a commitment that she didn't honor, a request that she didn't answer, or a question that she could not ask. She was a constant in each of our lives. I love you and why were probably her two most frequent utterances. The first, I love you, did not demand a response, but one always came back, I love you too, Bobbie. While the other, why, which did demand a response, often came back to her, at least from me, as why not? You know, sometimes just because, Bobbie, because sometimes her empathy, her genuineness, her intellect were too piercing for me to handle. Sometimes I just didn't want to answer her. Not because I wanted to hide the answer from her, but I wanted to hide the answer from myself. Bobbie was penetrating, perceptive, and above all, kind. She faced adversity with strength, defiance, and discipline, which she drew from her boys, and in her last 20 years, from the pure, unconditional love that she received from Patrick. Bobbie's mother taught her grit, her dad, graciousness. She and her twin brother, Jeff, played out different roles in their family dynamics, but they always played in harmony with each other. Bobbie and I have birthdays one day apart. Mine's November 5th, hers is November 6th. And although she was just a few years older than I, when I first met her, I was in college, and I thought she was years and years older than I. Why? To quote my friend, because she was already a grown-up. She was, let me count the ways. She was married. She was sophisticated, not in a fancy way, but in a worldly way. She had traveled and studied while she was in college, traveled abroad and studied in college. She had been in the Peace Corps. I mean, she'd gone to Africa. Heck, she could speak Swahili. She knew how to cook over a campfire, but still eat with continental style. She was articulate, and she had an opinion about, well, just about everything. She had a baby. She knew important people. She had important jobs. She had important ideas. She asked important questions. She listened to NPR. And most importantly, She was loved by a very important person in my life, which was my soon-to-be sister-in-law, Nelia Hunter. Nelia and Bobbie had been sorority sisters at Syracuse University, and they remained close friends after they graduated. Nelia stayed in Syracuse because my brother Joe was finishing up law school there. Bobbie was the first to marry. She and her husband, Davy and Neil's dad, went on to join the Peace Corps. And I'm pretty sure that that's why I was Nelia's maid of honor. I was a stand-in for Bobbie. She couldn't get back from Kenya. Nelia was clever that way. Oh no, Valerie, I love you best. That wasn't it. I was the stand-in. Even though they were continents away, they were always in each other's heart. And fast forward now to 1972. Joe was planning to run for the United States Senate from Delaware. I was the campaign manager. We knew no one in power, no one with experience, no one with money, no one with influence. But we had a secret weapon, Bobbie Greene. She had been, as we learned this morning, and you all know, she was the oral historian for the Kennedy Library. She was book smart, she was savvy, she was informed, and she knew politics. And more importantly, she understood how politics and family came together. So she joined our campaign with baby Davy on her hip. She'd come up to Delaware on Sunday nights, and she would stay at Joe and Nelia's through Thursday. My mother is a heroine in this story because my mom got baby Davy, Bo, Hunt, and little Naomi, Joe's youngest child. In the daytime, those 4 babies were passed off to Mom, 4 under 4. While Bobbie went into the office and gathered research and policy papers, and Nelia gathered votes at coffees and events. Well, you know, we won, and we were really riding high for 6 weeks until December 18th, when Nelia and the children were in that terrible accident, and Nelia and the baby did not survive, but the boys did. And it seemed like everybody in the country was worried about Joe and the boys. I had moved in to help raise the boys with my brother. It was a great privilege that my brother welcomed me to do that. But you know, Bobbie was worried about me. She insisted on keeping me close. She embraced me, even though I went kicking and screaming because I did not want to be embraced. Like, leave me alone. I'll figure this out myself. But as you know, Bobbie was persistent, thank God. And finally, I gave up and gave in to the comfort and joy in Bobbie's strength and her sharing with me memories of Nelia and helping me help Joe raise the boys. Bobbie was an educator, an advocate, and biggest quality that we all know, so loyal. Once she put her teeth into your ankle, you couldn't shake her. She would summon facts and figures in defense of her friends, many of them public officials, and go after the offender, in a fierce yet refined way. I mean, no vulgarity ever passed her lips. But I can tell you firsthand, if you crossed Joe Biden in her presence, you were traveling at your own risk. She had a memory like a steel trap. She did not brook fools, nor did she brook cheap shots. Bobbie had a code of honor that was quite simple. Don't tread on my friends. Bobbie seemed as comfortable, as the saying goes, with paupers as she was with queens. It didn't seem to matter. I mean, I would watch how she played my brother, for one. I mean, he was like her yo-yo. A typical exchange would be, God darn it, Bobbie, I am not going to do that. Followed a few minutes later by, okay, what's his number? Bobbie knew the world on a first-name basis, and as an advocate, she knew who to call just for what thing. And she also knew their phone number. And what really always amazed me was that the people picked up the phone. They answered her call because they know that there was something that she wanted, and she was fierce. And they said, okay, let's see what it is. She had that way, you know, that special thing that everybody knew it, everybody could feel it. So in the end, we all just rolled over and did what she asked. Many years after Bobbie's many kindnesses to me and my family, I got the opportunity to give back to her. And boy, oh boy, it was a home run, a grand slam home run with the bases loaded. My husband, Jack, gets a little bit of credit for this, too. It all started with Jack and his friend, Patrick McCarthy, who was smart, attractive, single, and alone at the time. And Jack had a mission. It's kind of like, you know, the Jewish mother, get him a girl already, you know, that's find me a nice girl for this man. That was Jack. He enlisted my help, and he said, Valerie, who do we know that we can introduce to Patrick, who is smart, attractive, and strong, because we need a strong woman to deal with Patrick. So I said, well, you know, how about so-and-so? Okay, we agreed, so we invited so-and-so over and introduced him to Patrick, and, well, we swung and missed a few times with so-and-so. So by Memorial Day weekend, I had had enough of being a matchmaker. Patrick was screwing up my summer. Even though it hadn't started yet, I could see where it was heading. So I told Patrick if I were going to continue to be his scout, he was going to pay for my services. I told him in the end he would thank me because in the end I could save him money. I would just cut to the chase, you know, if you went out with this woman more than 3 times, you're going to spend as much money on her as you could with me for just making it easier and stopping at 2, you know? So he agreed to my terms. And my terms that he would pay me in the form of Manolo Blahnik shoes. I got to pick them out. Were I to be successful in introducing him to a woman of substance whom he would pursue with determination and passion. He immediately agreed to Blinko who? Shoes, but he agreed. He got the idea. And I had him just where I wanted him because I had Bobbie Greene in mind. So Bobbie came to our home that weekend. The 4 of us, Jack, Bobbie, Patrick, and I went out to dinner. We came home, and Jack and I went upstairs early and left the kids downstairs to talk. And talk they did until late into the night. And the next morning, I asked Bobbie, so how'd it go? And she smiled and looked at me, and she said, I'm going to marry that man. And the rest is history. They fell in love and married, by which time I had accumulated 5 pairs of Manolo Blahnik. That was my fee for introduction and shepherding their relationship. And the kicker was, when they got married, I got another pair. But the year after, if they were still together 1 year after, I got 2. So I was pretty good. How to make a deal, I could do that. So in matchmaking for Patrick, I had saved the best to last, which was Bobbie. Bright, warm, smiling Bobbie. She was summer. She was summer, and she saved all of her remaining summers for Patrick. And in return, Patrick showered her with his love, his respect, and security. They were 2 wholes, you know, not 2 halves to come together to make a whole. They were 2 wholes who came together to make a 3rd complete circle Patrick created a world for Bobbie where she was adored and adorned as the love of his life. So too this morning, I saved the best to last, Davy and Neil. Davy and Neil, you're going to have to forgive us as friends of your mom. Although you're grown men, we know you as her boys. Her love for you was limitless. I don't have to tell you that. But all of our friends here today, we can repeat stories about you. You were her core, her spirit, her pure love. We know how much your mom absolutely cherished you, each as an individual, a one-of-a-kind man. Davy, the young author who wrote great sea adventures, and Neil, the poet laureate. Your mom fit no mold, and she never wanted you to be forced into a mold that wasn't who you were. Cammie, you became a cherished daughter, and everyone who knows Bobbie is grateful to you for the joy and the comfort that you brought into her life, especially with her firstborn grandson, Bryce, who just didn't walk, he walked on water. Her pride and joy that you so lovingly shared with her. And Neil and Erica, you gave her Poeta and West, each child full of promise and beauty, another little one for Bobbie to love with abandon. And just as Patrick was the beneficiary of so much love from Bobbie's boys, so too was Bobbie from Patrick's girls. Kelly married Allison, gave her Oliver. Jeannie married John, and they had Violet, Brett, and Avi. And Julie married Lionel, and Watt, Simone, and Oscar followed. They all created a magnificent family that, as Patrick said, Bobbie held together. She was the glue, the grande dame, respected and respectful. Today is a gathering I think that Bobbie Greene McCarthy would approve. It has called together her immediate family and friends from all over the country who've had the privilege of belonging to her extended family. And even though we've gathered here in sadness because of her loss, we've come together out of respect for a valued friend and in celebration of a life well lived. George Eliot said, and I quote, "I like not only to be loved, but to be told that I am loved. The realm of silence is large enough beyond the grave," end quote. Well, Bobbie, I hope we told you loud enough, because you sure did tell us. There are the visible things, the election she helped us win, the problems she helped us solve, the birthdays she never forgot, the parties that she planned, the praise that was rightfully hers, that she always deflected to someone else, the music and the people she loved, the flowers she gathered, the meals she cooked. These were all symbols of the ways that Bobbie made life more colorful, more fragrant, and more beautiful. Bobbie met life on its own terms, even though she never stopped trying to cajole, persuade, and improve upon it. Bobbie sometimes lived life as prose, like we all do, but mainly she made poetry of her life, its blows and its scars, its joys and celebrations. She wove it together by force of will, grace, and spirit into an utterly complete work, majestic and profound, and unique and lasting. She died too young, but did not live too little. God bless.
Good morning. I know we are all feeling sadness after the initial shock at the death of our dear friend and colleague. It still really has not penetrated my heart. As one of Bobbie's oldest friends in both years and duration, I was honored and frankly intimidated when Dave and Neil asked me to share some thoughts with you today. Our lifetime of friendship allowed me to know and love Bobbie and Jeff's parents, Joe and Irene Weiss. They lived long enough and moved close enough so they could truly see and experience what an amazing woman she became, and that she did that on so many levels. And I also knew Bobbie's twin brother, Jeff. She would always brag about the advantages of being a boy-girl twin. And of course, one of these was having so many teenage boys around. We became fellow teachers as 20-somethings after her stint in the Peace Corps. We had adjoining classrooms, and she was the teacher every fourth grader wanted to have. Over the next 50 years, we always seemed to be next door, by phone, by thought, or in person. She was the sister I got to pick. At some point, she gave me a book written by someone she highly respected. The title of the book is It Takes a Village. I have thought about how Bobbie, in her public and personal life, really followed this narrative. She has some important colleagues who are sharing with you her endless contributions to her public life. I would like to be a small voice for her private one. Bobbie, or Aunt Bobbie, as she is known to my kids, and all those who are lucky enough to be her adopted nieces and nephews, remember her as the aunt with the gorgeous, distinctive handwriting on birthday cards and words of encouragement. She made the best bows on any gift they were ever given, and she was always there with love and support. When unexpectedly she became a single mom to toddlers Davy and Neil G, and I apologize, but that's what she always called them, she managed to survive this and use that boundless energy to make the new uncharted life secure and safe for her boys. The three of them were the indomitable threesome. There were, of course, some adventures in rearing these two highly energetic, fun-filled kids and all that engenders, such as alligators growing in the basement who would come up to the top of the steps to the horror of anybody opening that basement door. There were a few tears and many laughs on the way to them becoming the men, the husbands, the fathers she so greatly admired. Bobbie's village grew bigger as Cammie and Erica came into the greenhouse. Her strong, girly side was finally realized, for lotions and potions were available. And then her great love, Patrick. He was in her life, and they joined hands and hearts, and this brought together Dave and Neil, Kelly, Jeannie, and Julie, and that family village mushroomed into 5 kids, their wonderful spouses, and the 10 grandchildren we see and hear today. In recent years on Thanksgiving Eve, I would get a call about a high chair or high chairs that were needed to go around her Thanksgiving table, her favorite holiday. I would bring the chairs and share a cup of tea as she finished the finishing touches on a table that in typical Bobbie style would have put and inspired Martha Stewart. She'd then move to the large bunch of flowers on the kitchen counter and began to assemble the centerpiece. As she picked up to each flower, I watched how she really appreciated each individual for its beauty and difference and how that would impact the bouquet. Strategically, she placed the blossom in the vase. It was as if each represented one of her beautiful, special grandchildren. There was a flower for Bryce, Poeta, West, Violet, Brett, Avi, Wyatt, Simone, Oliver, and Oscar. Bobbie, Mom, Grammy would stand back and take a few seconds to enjoy each addition of a flower to the contribution of that bouquet. Although each maintained its individual character, together they really supported and enhanced each other. And as this labor of love was completed, she centered it on the table. It was clear that the sum of the parts truly was even more beautiful by being part of this spectacular whole. And I believe, once again, Bobbie was reaffirming that it takes a village. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly McCarthy, and I happily have the honor today of also speaking on behalf of my sisters Jeannie and Julie. Bobbie called us her bonus daughters. She always had great names for things. She was the first person to teach me that Neiman Marcus is actually called Needless Markup, and that Target is actually pronounced Target. And when all of us started having children of our own, she called our kids, her 10 grandchildren, the Grands. Even the way she pronounced their names was grand. When she asked about our son Oliver, she would say, "How is Oliver?" And grand is just how I thought about Bobbie, which is funny because I don't think she was much more than 5 feet tall. But she had a great smile, a truly grand smile, and she always dressed, as so many have said today, so elegantly, as if she was about to attend some grand event. I loved looking inside the bathroom. She used as sort of a grand getting ready for the day space. Every time I went in there, I would get lost looking at all the beautiful little bottles of potions and lotions and perfumes that she used. But she also filled that little bathroom, every inch of open space, with pictures of her and my dad that had been taken over the years. And that's what I loved about Bobbie. In this little space of hers, her bathroom, she had created the perfect balance of grand and personal. She had that ability with everything that she did to effortlessly merge the grand and the personal. A show of hands. How many people here have ever had the pleasure to receive a gift from Bobbie? Pretty much everyone. I remember the first time Bobbie gave me a Christmas gift. Maybe some of you do too. All I know is I didn't want to open it. I was scared. I'd never seen any gift wrapped the way she'd wrapped her Christmas gift, with branches and pine cones and sprigs of holly and the kind of thick, gorgeous wrapping paper that you don't really see anymore. They were works of art in and of themselves, and you almost forgot that there was something else inside, which of course was always some incredibly thoughtful gift that was so personal to you, and usually from one of her travels to help better the lives of women and girls in need. I remember the first time I asked Bobbie for a glass of water, which was the first time I visited her in my dad's house. Half an hour later, she returned with a glass of water with ice, a circular paper-thin slice of lemon, mint leaves, and a metal stirrer, and a large wicker basket lined with a colorful kitchen towel and filled with warm brie, the kind with the fruit on top, and crackers and vegetables and sliced fruit, and I just asked for a glass of water. But that's just how Bobbie was. She would always put 1,000% into everything she did. She couldn't do things any other way. Even her handwriting was grand. I love receiving her personal thank you notes, which she never forgot to send. No matter how small the gift had been, she was as gracious as she was grateful always. She was also one of the most passionate women I had ever met. I remember one holiday she and my dad took my wife, Allison, and I to a movie. I don't remember the film, but there was a character in it who was incredibly unsavory, but who did a really good job of being bad. Afterward, I asked Bobbie what she thought of the movie, and she passionately protested how horrible the character was, and essentially how he should be banned for Hollywood for playing that role. And I'm pretty sure it was Matt Damon. But that's what I loved about Bobbie. She always stood up for what she believed in, and she always worked for who she believed in. But most of all, Bobbie loved passionately. At the end of the day, her heart rested with her family. She kept a grand house that always had vases of fresh flowers to welcome visitors, And what she loved most is when all of us, her sons, her daughters-in-law, her bonus daughters, and our spouses, her grandchildren, the grands, were all together in it. Your entire family loves and misses you, Bobbie. Our lives were better and grander because you were in it. Thank you.
What a wonderful life we are celebrating today. And we're just touching the surface. There are so many people across our own country and literally as far away as Kenya, around the world, who have been touched by and changed by Bobbie's life and her work and her love. I was very fortunate that she came to the White House to be my deputy chief of staff. As I recall, it happened the same momentous year that she began to fall in love with Patrick. And by the way, Patrick, I want to get on the shoe list. Valerie earned every pair of those shoes. But there are others of us who could use some new shoes. She came to work in the White House in 1997 under the Chief of Staff, Milan Verveer, whom you have already heard from. It was such a coup for us to convince Bobbie to come work with us. I knew that we shared a deep appreciation for so many common interests: standing up for children, advancing the rights and opportunities and full participation of women and girls. I felt like she was another kindred spirit. And there was so much work to be done. She had a full plate. She was helping in every endeavor that we had underway. And then all of a sudden, we realized we were on the brink of a new millennium. Well, what would we do? Some of you might remember there was a great deal of concern about what would happen at the turn of the millennium, the century, to computers and connected networks. So we knew that there was some worrisome work that had to be done, but what could we do that would celebrate this extraordinary milestone? So we began to brainstorm. And of course, Bobbie was in the midst of all of that. She was practical and poised. She had an uncanny ability to find the calm in the midst of chaos. She handled the most daunting task with grace, determination, and relentless positivity. You know, there were not always good days in those years. You know, just saying. And sometimes the last thing I wanted to do was to see Bobbie with that big smile. You know, there's a myth about the White House, maybe not this White House, but prior White Houses, that, you know, if the president or the first lady or the vice president or the second lady is walking down a hallway, you're not supposed to talk to them. How ridiculous. But often it was I who didn't want to talk to Bobbie, because she would want to begin to be positive. And I just wanted to wallow a little. And then there was her style, which was impeccable. That hair. You know, as someone who has spent a lot of my life thinking about, worrying about, I finished this book, and one of the things I calculated was during this presidential campaign, which, give or take was about 600 days of fun and excitement. I calculated I spent 25 days, not 25 hours, 25 days getting my hair and makeup done. And Bobbie just looked fabulous every single day. Another reason I didn't want to see her. But when it came to making decisions and tackling hard problems, there was nobody that I'd want to see more. Whether she was in a meeting, whether she was handling a sticky political or personnel problem, she was savvy with a smile. And when we began to come up with the idea of Save America's Treasures as one way of commemorating the millennium, nobody was more enthusiastic and helpful in guiding us to understand what it is we might do. As Milan said, we wanted to honor the past, but imagine the future. And we knew that there were these extraordinary artifacts and sites all over our country that maybe even people in the immediate area did not know the significance of. And as we began putting this project together, Bobbie was in the heart and soul of it. She was the person who figured out how to save Old Glory. It was deteriorating at the Smithsonian. It was the flag that was flying in the War of 1812 when the Star-Spangled Banner was written. There wasn't the money and the public funds to be able to embark on what was a multi-year, highly specialized project. So we had to find ways to pay for it. And we just unleashed Bobbie Greene McCarthy. She was the perfect tour guide. She would lead groups of us to places around our country, busfuls of people. She was the person you wanted by your side on a visit to Harriet Tubman's home in upstate New York or Thomas Edison's invention factory in New Jersey. We were proud of that commitment to our country's past and imagining its future. And when Bill and I were leaving the White House at the end of his second term, it was Bobbie we turned to save America's treasures. And as was her habit, her practice, her example, she never wavered. You heard Fiona read that wonderful letter from Richard about the partnership that was formed with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. But what the key to saving it was immediately after the Clinton administration was Bobbie's work to engage and bring on board Laura Bush, who became one of the program's most enthusiastic champions. Bobbie loved that work. The very last email that I received from Bobbie was in the presidential campaign where she was encouraging and door-knocking, canvassing, and supporting. But she sent me this email on June 24th, 2016. She knew I'd want to hear that, as she said, it seems our hopelessly gridlocked Congress actually has found something to agree on, resuscitating Save America's Treasures. That would not have happened without Bobbie's work. She somehow managed to put together a bipartisan group in the House that added $5 million for the program into the 2017 budget. Half of this email is in all caps. Because in addition to giving me the good news, she also, of course, was giving me direction. So the fourth paragraph in all caps is, I keep thinking of all the wonderful sites in battleground states and what good backdrops and photo ops they could make. It is so fitting that over the last few weeks, one historic site after another has paused to pay tribute to Bobbie. Sewell Belmont House, now the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument, which was one of our first 4 treasures. Eleanor Roosevelt's home, Valkill, a place I've been many times and actually visited again after the election, will feel the benefit of Bobbie's extraordinary work for years to come as we continue to educate generations into the future about the extraordinary Eleanor Roosevelt. Everyone has a Bobbie story. If you traveled with us as we went up into New England and across New York or out into Mesa Verde or the Yakima Pueblo, she was our mother hen. She was the herder of cats. She was the person who made sure that everybody was on board with the importance of our mission. She helped us. She advised us. She spurred us on. She never let anyone give up on themselves or the work we could do together. She really believed that America was a great village. Because of her, countless Americans will experience history coming to life. When they see the Star-Spangled Banner now fully restored and on display again, when they visit President Lincoln's cottage here in the district or peer in the window of the bus where Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat, when they stand on the street corner in Seneca Falls, New York, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Frederick Douglass once stood at the first women's rights convention in the history of the world. Maybe they'll stand a little taller. Maybe they'll be prouder of their Native American heritage or their immigrant heritage and know what a contribution those who came before have made to the great American dream and experience. So maybe they'll chase their own dreams. Maybe they will go on to change the world. And when they do, they'll be living Bobbie's legacy. She approached every challenge with a sense of adventure and humor. Her indomitable spirit buoyed us through good times and hard ones. I loved catching up with her at Vital Voices events on this stage year after year. And I will be forever grateful to her. Bobbie, you are and will be dearly missed. We thank you for being part of our lives. We thank you for being our very own American treasure. Thank you.
Hello. It's a tough act to follow. I look out and I see so many great people, lifelong friends and new friends too. I also see an endless sea of thank you notes Mom would have me write. Neil G. Sweetie, did you write your thank you notes? She's been saying this to Dave and me since we could write our names. It was only recently that I got her to stop buying me underwear. But maybe that's because she loved to shop. Even since she was a little kid, according to her twin brother, Jeff Weiss, AKA Unc. Unc is older by 12 minutes. My grandmother didn't know she was having twins, as Mom and Unc's hearts were beating in sync. So after Unc joined the party, the doctor said, "I think we have another." To which my grandmother replied in her best Bronx accent, "What do you mean there's another?" Mom never said it, but maybe she felt like she started life 12 minutes late, which in turn gave her that incredible drive and ability to sleep no more than 6 hours for most of her life. She was indefatigable. "There's so much to do," she would often say, but she always made time for Dave and me, and she never stopped being a mom, a Grammy to all the grandchildren, and a great partner and wife to Patrick. There was life before Dave and me, and there was life after we left home. After receiving a full scholarship to Syracuse and graduating, she and my dad heeded Kennedy's call. They were amongst the first Peace Corps volunteers in Kenya, as you have already heard. Such an elegant woman lived without electricity atop a mountain with only a motorcycle to get to town, crossing the equator every time they descended the winding dirt road. During this time, she started teaching sex education classes and founded one of the first Girl Scout troops, along with many other great accomplishments on an extremely local level. Kenya couldn't stop Mom from keeping up with the Mombasas. She still ironed her tablecloths, but with an iron that was made hot by placing embers from the fire into its belly. During this time, Mom spoke fluent Swahili. She taught Dave and me patches of it here and there, which still comes in handy every now and again. I can always get a Swahili speaker to smile when I speak Mom's favorite sentence, "Siwezi kukumbuka niliweka wapi," which means I can't remember where I put it. Despite the challenges of life in Kenya, it was nothing compared to when our dad left. Mom protected Dave and me from things she thought would trouble us, sometimes to a fault, but always with the idea of making our lives as peaceful as possible. Dave and I do not know how hard those first years really were. We were so young. We then lived in the house in Patuxent State Park. It was the only house for miles amidst a great swath of river and forest. The park gate was locked each night, so Mom had to drive hours into Washington to work at the National Archives for the Kennedy Library, and then rush home so she wouldn't get locked out. As parents now, it is unimaginable how she kept so resolute and positive. Our childhood felt trouble-free, and Mom never complained about being a single mother, ever. Dave and I never really knew another life, and there wasn't anything to really complain about. We were a small family, but we had so many of you seated here, the aunts. We know you were there for Mom, always. Thank you, Aunt Pat, Aunt Val, Aunt Joan, Aunt Judy, Aunt Michael, and for me, especially the Tier family, who were always there for me. And many of you here now who we have yet to meet. Dave and I know your names, and you're an integral part of Mom's life, and we look forward to getting to know you better. And I would just like to add that if anybody in this room finds themselves in the wildlands of Western Massachusetts or Maryland, you have friends and a place to sleep. That's everybody here. Mom was no helicopter parent. She was the opposite. My brother and I had an unprecedented amount of freedom that came with growing up in the 80s with a single mother who supported a family by herself with little to no help. During this time, Dave and I amassed a great arsenal of BB guns, one for every kid on our block. We also acquired 1,200 cans of new Coke, captured in a daring nighttime repelling raid by my Dave's BB gun commando unit. The irony being twofold, our mother waged for peace, and when Dave asked for Sun Tzu's The Art of War for Christmas, she inscribed the book from your mom, who has tried to teach you the art of peace. And secondly, because Mom would not buy us Coke, yet we had more than the entire neighborhood combined. Dave kept these Cokes in our basement guarded by 2 alligators. Yes, real alligators. For years, this contraband and critters stewed in our basement. Mom absolutely never went down there. She hated the basement. It was the Alaska of Edward Avenue. Wild and unmanageable, two things she avoided after Kenya. But alas, one day she came home early from work, which you all know was very rare. My brother had the alligators collared and sunning themselves in the backyard. My friends and I were probably watching a movie like Apocalypse Now or Uncommon Valor, and Mom could see the gators in the backyard from upstairs. This historic green conversation went something like, "Davy, what are those in the backyard?" Long pause. Dave, Neil, and Tom look at each other with wide eyes. Alligators? And where do they live when they're not in the backyard? In the basement? Long pause. Even longer. Okay, she replied. And that was it. She knew this was the price of having boys and raising us alone. There was a kind of exchange of freedom for all parties involved, and she had bigger battles to fight. It was only a couple of weeks later in a meeting with President Clinton, she was telling him the story. Dave and I believe Mom got a lot of street cred in DC. So you're welcome, Mom. As peaceful as she may have been, Mom was battling every day. This was most evident for Dave and me during her time at People for the American Way. Those were long days fighting side by side with Milan, Pam, Supreme Commander Norman Lear, and so many others from this network of great people and organizations gathered here today. Dave and I would sometimes take the Red Line after school to meet at People for. Walking down the halls felt like something between a war room, and the bullpen at Clark Kent's Daily Planet. This is where Dave and I saw firsthand the blur between family and work. For me, there's no better example as when Mom's dear friend and co-worker at People for, Art Kropp, passed away. He was far, far too young. Mom was someone who only lost control at Sunday morning political talk shows. But when Art's casket came down the aisle, Mom was so caught up in the loss, she lunged from her seat in the pew just to touch the coffin. I knew then that her love and life was so broad. There were no walls between family and work, as you all can now here clearly see. At home during those days, nights ended with a mandatory reading or story time. Sometimes she could barely keep her eyes open to read, so Dave and I actually had to nudge her to keep her going. Often they were not the usual bedtime fairy tale, but stories of JFK and PT 109, the Cuban Missile Crisis, MLK, and Watergate. Other kids had Jack and the Beanstalk, we had Jack and Bobbie. And the finale was always one of her favorite songs, which usually was You Are My Sunshine, with Nakupenda Kabisa said as she closed the door, which is Swahili for I love you very much. We were never allowed to go to bed angry, which was a standing rule in the house. But her night would only begin there as she sat up in bed and did all the work she couldn't get to during her 12-hour workday. Was that pushing too hard? Maybe. But I think to her, the work was worth it. Keeping a wacko off the Supreme Court was more important than an extra hour of sleep. Preserving Thomas Edison's house was more important than an extra hour of sleep. Trying to help people escape the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia was more important than an extra hour of sleep. The night might have been short, but the next morning began with her wake-up song, if she hadn't already gone to work, Good Morning to You, and that went straight through high school. With all this work, time with Mom was time to remember and cherish. She never stopped being who she was, loving, generous, fancy, and elegant, totally proper and as near perfect as she could always be. Always. Even with the aforementioned alligators and contraband in the basement, everything sparkled as best it could. She was a true gourmet chef. We don't know of any formal training she took, but when it came to sit-down dinner, you got the full production, from beautiful settings and candles to magnificently prepared and garnished multi-course meals. For some reason, she would never allow a piece of commercial packaging on the table. She never said that. It was just never, ever there. The production, the placement of each tiny piece of rosemary would drive us crazy, but after the first bite, all was forgiven. If it was pizza night, she would light candles. The butter had to be in a ceramic bowl and smooth before being put back in the fridge. If you wanted a glass of water, here's a glass of water with lemon, a silver straw, and a sprig of mint if it was in season. In all my life, I never saw her hair wet. She only swam the... She only swam the side stroke while wearing a bathing cap. I never saw her drink a beer, only white wine. Never coffee, always tea with lemon. Never showers, always bubble baths. Her penmanship made the people think twice about their life choices. It had the elegance of some Jane Austen character mixed with the creative whimsy and exuberance that mirrored her personality so well. Therefore, alas, it was impossible for Dave to forge her signature on his report cards. In 7th grade, my great friend who was here today once held up a note my mom wrote in the principal's office and bragged that he knew the person who wrote so beautifully. That penmanship would also annihilate reports my brother and I wrote in school. She would hold us to the same standard as those she worked with. Papers had to be double-spaced to allow for enough room for her to edit. I once cried after she wrote a paper. "It's not even my paper anymore," I said through tears. But I did get my revenge, though, when my 6th grade teacher at Ashburton Elementary returned a paper with a comma added as its only correction. I showed Mom, proud that someone had caught her grammatical mistake. To which she looked at it, frowned, and said, "That comma does not go there." My brother and I finally entered the workforce with quite a high bar to live up to, but Mom could care less about our career heights, though she never hesitated to tell us about all of yours. In my early years out of school, if I was cutting lawns or living on a socialist puppet commune in Vermont, Mom was likely bragging to her friends that I was the best with the lawnmower and puppets. If Dave was cutting fish through college, Dave could fillet a salmon better than anyone at all of Sutton Place. We couldn't do wrong because there was only unconditional love. She bragged about us no matter what the accomplishment. But Mom was most proud of Dave and me for finding such great women to spend our lives with and for making outrageously fantastic grandchildren. She loved them so much, she gave them the same treatment we got, boundless love and endless hugs. This was across the board for our bonus sisters and their kids as well. But she herself, in hindsight, was surprisingly modest about what she had done. She would occasionally invite us to an event she helped organize during her time at People 4 with First Lady Hillary Clinton, Save America's Treasures, and Vital Voices. We met a lot of remarkable people who came up to us and sang Mom's praises. Dave and I would often leave these events saying, "Why the hell didn't you tell us you knew them?" When Patrick and his wonderful daughters came along, I remember pulling away from home on my way to California, and Mom was, of course, crying and waving, and I felt so happy for her that she had found Patrick, someone she loved so much and who loved her equally in return. And here we are, so many decades gone by, having come full circle at the Kennedy Center, all of us coming together in a place that mirrors Mom's spirit of life and service, a place where Mom tried to culture up a couple of savages from Bethesda with plays and concerts. My brother and I even graduated high school here. How many millions of dollars did Mom raise here? How many careers did she inspire and accelerate here? And now this memorial in this great hall with the many themes of a great woman: loyal friend, mentor, unstoppable worker, loving mother, magnificent wife. A woman who decided long ago that her life would be lived with determination, purpose, contribution, loyalty, and love, despite unexpected and deliberate obstacles flung by others. She, in fact, lived not chasing those 12 minutes, but as someone who knew time was scarce and there was great work to be done. She gave as much of her time as possible to everyone in this hall and to people far beyond the Beltway and borders. And now she has crossed the only aisle that truly matters. She would answer her phone for any of you here and now if she could. My brother and I have no regrets with our mom. We miss her like so many of you here and just wish so damn much that she could be here because she would want to be with all of her family finally gathered in one place. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is such an incredible gathering, isn't it? I mean, I just think it's so worthy of our dear Bobbie. Thank you all for coming. You know, I've been racking my brain the last couple weeks trying to come up with that perfect one story that could possibly convey what Bobbie means to me, and I think all of us in her Vital Voices family. And the thing is that I discovered, as I was racking my brain, there isn't one story, one thing. That was actually the power of Bobbie. There were 1,000 things. All those 1,000 little and big things that all added up to making all of us who knew her feel so special and supported and loved. I was fortunate enough to, I felt, have Bobbie as a second mother. She was a mentor, she was a friend, she was a colleague, she was a boss, she was an employee, and all these things actually at the same time. I think back over the most significant moments of my life over the last 20 years that I've known Bobbie. And as I was thinking about those moments, I realized that she was there for every single one of them. Every celebration, birthday, anniversary, the first to show up at the hospital after my children were born and hold them when they were hours old, that was Bobbie. What's been astounding to me since she passed was to learn that everyone feels that way about Bobbie. Everyone had that experience, that she was always right there. Bobbie just had this endless reservoir of love and care for each and every one of us, and so many people who couldn't be here today. She had this uncanny ability to remember the smallest but most important little details of a magnitude of friends' lives, and always be on the scene when it mattered most. Vital Voices women around the world were certainly no exception. If one of the thousands of women leaders that we work with around the world was facing a crisis or was in grasp of some great opportunity, it was always Bobbie that was first on the scene, digging in, ready to call up anyone she knew to help. Now, I have no doubt that many of you here were on the other end of those phone calls. I thank you for that. Earlier this year, Bobbie became captivated with Chief Kachindamoto from Malawi. She's working to end child marriage in Malawi, and I think it must have reminded Bobbie of her old Peace Corps days. I remember when they first met on the steps of Donna and Mac McClarty's home. Bobbie, of course, sat there the way she does, the way she leans in and listens with an open heart and mind. She wanted to understand everything that the chief was up against out in rural Malawi. She wanted to understand all her greatest needs. And she went home that night and, of course, in Bobbie's way, put a check in the mail and sent it off to rural Malawi to fund school fees for some of the neediest girls in the village. Of course, knowing Bobbie, that's not where it ended. The next morning, she got up, she called up Molly Melching of Tostan and said, okay, we need to figure out how we bring your model to ending female genital mutilation from Senegal to Malawi. Of course, got them on the phone and arranged for that to happen. She next realized that, in her many conversations with the chief, that the chief needed desks for the school for girls to keep them from not being married off. And she realized that Lawrence O'Donnell of MSNBC has a foundation that sends desks to Malawi or other places around the world. And she immediately called up and told him all about the chief and got desks sent off to Malawi. And so on and so forth, and the calls went on. She even had Skype calls with rural Malawi to explore, ideas and make connections. Now, that says a lot about Bobbie, doesn't it? That she had Skype calls with Malawi. I mean, Bobbie's old school, wouldn't you agree? I mean that in the very richest meaning of the phrase. We all know she made her best efforts to understand the latest gadgets, probably to keep up with her many grandchildren. But I'm sorry to call you out on this, Bobbie, but technology was just not her friend. I think she was actually convinced that it was Steve Jobs that had personally programmed her iPad to permanently be set on the all caps mode. And Hillary thought she was just directing her, but no, it was permanently set that way. And still, she called rural Malawi. The last time that I saw Bobbie, just this past June, she was at my son's birthday, his first birthday, and she was at my ear, at my side, as I'm running around, preparing things, telling me about the chief. Everything she still wanted to do for the chief, who she was planning to call that week to help the chief. Classic Bobbie. She did all this not just for the chief, but for countless women leaders. Because she knew this is what it takes to make change. It was a personal mission for Bobbie. It took compassion, dedication, and grit. And you know, Bobbie had all of those virtues in spades. She was relentlessly compassionate. In the weeks since her passing, I've come to fully appreciate the way that Bobbie lived. You know, Bobbie wasn't just there at the creation for Vital Voices. She wasn't just the strength in bringing so many of you here around it to support it. She wasn't just leading it and building it to the organization it is today. As I really began to think about her life over these past 2 months, I realized that Bobbie embodies what's most powerful about Vital Voices. She taught us that it's not about that one grand gesture. Real change takes time. It's about the thousands of gestures. It's about that steady personal support, like she's given to all of us. It's about knowing that someone is going to be there for the long haul. It's about making those who feel alone on their path to change the world know that they're not alone. They have an ally standing right there beside them. For her Vital Voices family, that is what Bobbie's legacy is all about. So to honor that and spread that magnificent legacy, we've established the BOBBIE GREENE McCARTHY Fellowship for Exceptional Public Leadership. Each year, we plan to support a woman leader who is at a turning point. A woman leader who Bobbie would have made all those phone calls for. A woman leader who needs that Bobbie spirit, that relentless compassion that won't quit. This November, we'll announce our first fellow on what would have been Bobbie's 75th birthday. And to Patrick and her beloved family, and it is true, you guys, she loved you so much. To you guys, I promise that her legacy will live on, because every single woman who receives this fellowship that bears her name will know all about Bobbie. And they will learn about that generosity and that spirit, and they will spread it. They'll spread it for generations to come. Thank you all.
Thank you all for coming. Please keep your eye out for BobbieGreeneMcCarthy.org, which will help us preserve her legacy and what she stood for. And anybody who has the time, please hang out with us in the lobby now and sign the books. Thank you very much.